the US. I'm not going to talk to you about India. We have a venerable senior attorney like Mr. Subbrao, not to mention Justice Gopal Gowda, and our own beloved friend, comrade Muralidhar, who is an authority on labor jurisprudence. But the situation in India, you know, is very, very distressing. The other thing that we have to concern ourselves with is platform economy. Platforms like Uber, Ola, Deliveroo, and so on, they have started employing lots of people. These are contract workers. They have the illusory choice of autonomy and flexibility. They are called micro-entrepreneurs. They are not employees, they are micro-entrepreneurs. And so they don't get any benefits. The fact, however, is they have to work close to 80 hours a week. 80 hours a week. They don't know when they will be asked to work. They have to be on call all the time. And 85% of the work that is sent to you, you have to accept. If you don't, then you have to go back and get recertified by paying at least $3,500. Every time you get into Ola or Uber, I don't know about Ola, sorry. I mean Uber, I know for a fact. You get a notification from the company to rate the driver. Now sometimes the driver is late because of traffic, sometimes the driver does not have a particularly clean car, and you give the fellow an 1 star. Well, if the average is less than 4.5, he will be stripped of his license, he has to retrain and pay close to $4,000 in the United States. So this is how bad the situation is. This is the challenge of flexible digital capitalism. It exploits people and lowers their wages. There are 3 main problems here. Number 1 is precarity. ಈ ಸತಿ ನಾವು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಅನೇಕರು ಬಹಳ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆಯಿಂದ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ರು, ಈಗೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ, ಸ್ವಿಗ್ಗಿ, ಝೊಮ್ಯಾಟೊ, ವೈಟ್ ಫೀಲ್ಡಲ್ಲಿರೋ ರೆಸ್ಟೋರೆಂಟ್ ಆದರೂ ತಂದು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ. ಆದರೆ ಅವರು ಹೇಗೆ ಬದುಕ್ತಾರೆ, ಹೇಗಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರು ಎಷ್ಟು ಸಂಬಳ ಪಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಗಮನಿಸಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಮ ಸೌಕರ್ಯ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಮಗೆ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಅವರ ಬಾಳು, ಅವರ ಭಾವನೆ, ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ದಿವ್ಯ ನಿರ್ಲಕ್ಷ್ಯ ಇದೆ. And this is what we mean by precarity. Now we got to keep in mind, if we leave behind huge chunks of the population, there is bound to be a trust deficit. If there is a trust deficit, it hurts social solidarity. And if there is a social a weakening or attenuation of social solidarity, that's the beginning of the end. So this is the first problem. The second problem is surveillance. New technologies have enabled corporations to use AI and so on to surveil their employees. Surveillance is more than just watching. It's a form of oversight that judges and intervenes to shape behavior. Surveillance leads to capital accumulation. There's a wonderful book by Shoshana Zuboff, a professor at Harvard. She's written a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, published in 2019. Zuboff says that industrial capitalism exploited the nature. Surveillance capitalism exploits human nature. It exploits human nature. What it does is it collects and processes data and it monitors our behavior. This is a new form of capital accumulation. So ಇದು ಎರಡನೇ ವಿಚಾರ. ಮೂರನೇದು erosion of dignity and recognition. ನೋಡಿ, ನಮಗೆ ನಿತ್ಯ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವರೆಲ್ಲ ಸಿಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಓಲಾ, ಊಬರ್, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಕಡೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡುವಂಥವರು. What they lack is dignity, and what they lack is recognition. Recognition is supremely important. There has been a great deal of work on recognition. Hegel ನಂತಹ ಮಹಾತತ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಜ್ಞ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮೊದಲು ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ದುಂಟು. He said that only recognition could make us become fully human. That original idea has been taken forward by a lot of people like George Herbert Mead, Charles Taylor, and so on. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಗಮನಿಸಬೇಕಾದ ವಿಚಾರ ಇಷ್ಟು: we all become fully human in and through a dialogic process. In other words, my humanity critically rests on your willingness to recognize it. If you don't recognize my humanity, if you withhold recognition, that's a form of oppression. So there is a dialogic process through which we all become human. ನೋಡಿ, ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ಗಮನ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಗಮನ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ರೆ ಏನಾಗತ್ತೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಬಹಳ ಸೈಕಿಕ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕಂಫರ್ಟ್ ಅಂತಾರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ತುತ್ತಾದವರ ನೋವು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅರ್ಥವಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಪೀಪಲ್ ಬಿಕಮ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಇನ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಥ್ರೂ ಅ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಆಫ್ ರೆಕಗ್ನಿಷನ್. I have to recognize your personhood, your humanity, you have to recognize mine. ಅದೇ ಥರ dignity. Immanuel Kant said that all human beings have dignity. ಯಾಕೆ dignity ಇದೆ? Because human beings are moral agents. If they are moral agents, they must be given the dignity that is their due. Whether or not they use their morality or their moral sense in ways in which they ought to. He talked about the categorical imperative, which means you have to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. He also said, never treat people as means to an end, but as ends in themselves. And finally, he says, you have to act as if you are a moral legislator of the world. Would you be all right if someone treated you like that? If that's not acceptable to you, you have no right to do this for anyone else. This is a very elaborate argument that Immanuel Kant makes in his Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals, published in 1797. ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅನೇಕ ಕೇಸಸ್ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾವೆ. ಕ್ಯಾಲಿಫೋರ್ನಿಯಾನಲ್ಲಿ 2 ಕೇಸು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಒಕಾನರ್ ವಿ ಊಬರ್ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್. ದಿ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ಕ್ಯಾಟಗಾರಿಕಲಿ ಸೆಡ್ ದಟ್ ದೀಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಆರ್ ನಾಟ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್, ದೇ ಆರ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್. ಯಾಕಂತಂದರೆ ನೋಡಿ, ಈ ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾನಲ್ಲಿ ದೇರ್ ಆರ್ ಸೆವ್ರಲ್ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಟು ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ಹೂ ಈಸ್ ಅ ವರ್ಕರ್. ಡಸ್ ಹಿ ಓನ್ ಹಿಸ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರುಮೆಂಟಾಲಿಟೀಸ್? ಈಸ್ ಹಿ ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಟು ಸಮ್ವನ್ಸ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್? ಈಸ್ ಹಿ ಸಮ್ವನ್ who is told what to do, etc., etc., etc. ಆ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ಗಳನ್ನ ನೀವು ಈ ಕೇಸಲ್ಲಿ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ, you find that there is a divergence of legal opinion. Some say no, 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 they are employees. Some others say no, no, they are not employees, they are independent contractors. California categorically said no, they are employees. Dynamics Corporations versus Superior Court of Los Angeles, again the same deal. The California Supreme Court said that they are employees. You know what these companies did? Lyft and Uber, they poured in $200 million for a budget, for a ballot proposal called Prop 22, Proposal 22. And this proposal was to limit the power of the legislature to make laws concerning this matter. It passed with a 59% vote. Thankfully, ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ನಾ ಹೇಳೋದು? Thankfully, you find that it was held unconstitutional. Okay, so this is very important. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಗಮನಿಸಬೇಕಾದ ವಿಚಾರ ಏನು? ಇಷ್ಟು ಹೊತ್ತು ನಾನು ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ವರ್ಗದವ್ರ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ. 3-4 ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಬರ್ತವೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. ಮೊದಲನೇದು, ವಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅವರ್ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಆಫ್ ಜಸ್ಟಿಸ್? ಎರಡನೇದು, ವಾಟ್ ಡು ವಿ ಓ ಈಚ್ ಅದರ್? What do we owe to the coming generations? And what is the best way to make sense of our situation? ನೋಡಿ, ಈ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು ಬಂದಿರೋದು ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ 2 ವಿಚಾರಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಗಮನಕ್ಕೆ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಲ್ಲ. ಮೊದಲನೇದು, ಮೈಕಲ್ ಸ್ಯಾಂಡಲ್ ಹೇಳೋ ಹಾಗೆ, technocratic way of conceiving public good. We have a technocratic attitude toward the public good. We don't understand that we are dealing with the public. Public means people who have rights. Secondly, meritocratic way of defining winners and losers. ನೋಡಿ, ಇದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಜನಸಾಮಾನ್ಯರು ನೀವು ಕೇಳಿದರೆ ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತೆ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ಅವ್ರ ಕಷ್ಟ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಸುಖ ನಮಗೆ. ಮೆರಿಟೋಕ್ರಾಟಿಕ್ ವೇ ಆಫ್ ಡಿಫೈನಿಂಗ್ ವಿನ್ನರ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಲೂಸರ್ಸ್, ಇದು ಬಹಳ ಸರ್ವೇ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾದಂಥ ಒಂದು ವಾದ. ನಾನು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನಾನು ಓದ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನಾನು ಮುಂದೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ನಾನು ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತ, ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ನನಗೆ ದಕ್ಕಿರೋ ಆಸ್ತಿ, ಸ್ಥಾನ, ಮಾನ ಇತ್ಯಾದಿಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ ನಿಜಕ್ಕೂ ಸಂದಬೇಕಾದಂಥದ್ದು, ನನಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕಾದಂಥದ್ದು. ಯಾರು ನನಗೆ ದಾನ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ. ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಿಗಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನೀವು ಸೋಮಾರಿಗಳಾಗಿರಬೇಕು, ಅಥವಾ ನೀವು ಹತದೃಷ್ಟಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು. ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡೋಣ? This is the meritocratic logic. The fact, however, is what? The fact is that when you look at people's lives, even those that are successful, what do you notice? That they become successful because a whole slew of factors that come in place. ಈಗ ನನ್ನೇ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ, I am supposedly a smart man, Comrade Muralidhar is certified. What is the general view? ಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ನಾನು ಇಷ್ಟು ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತ, ನಾನು ಎಷ್ಟು ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಎಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕಾದ್ದು ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅಂತ. Well, the fact is, I am able-bodied, I am a male, I was born and raised in a very loving family, I had great parents, I had wonderful teachers. ಮೇಷ್ಟ್ರು ಪಾಪ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಾತ್ರೂಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಚೌಚೌ ಬಾತ್ ಕೊಡಿಸ್ತಿದ್ರು ನಾನು ಹುಡುಗಾಗಿದ್ದಾಗ. ಬೇಕಾಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿ ಕೊಡಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇಡೀ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡೋಗಿ ಅಡಿಗೆ ನೋಟ್ಲು ರಂಗರಾವ್ ರೋಡಲ್ಲಿ ಇದು ಇನ್ನೂ ಇದೆ, ಕೊಡಿಸ್ತಿದ್ರು. ನೋಡಿ, ಅದೊಂದು ಸೌಭಾಗ್ಯ. ಇಫ್ ಯು ಆರ್ ಇನ್ ದ ರೂರಲ್ ಹಿಂಟರ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್, ಯು ಡೋಂಟ್ ಗೆಟ್ ದಟ್ ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್. ಸೊ ದ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಟ್ರೈಂಗ್ ಟು ಮೇಕ್ ಇಸ್, we become what we become because a whole slew of factors have fallen in place. I am what I am today because I have won what some people call the ovarian lottery or the genetic lottery. I am who I am because I have won the ovarian lottery. So my success is not entirely my own doing. This is a revolutionary thought. I want you to keep this in mind. ನೀವು ಜನರ ಸಂಘಟನೆ ಮಾಡೋ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಬಹಳ ಸಲ ಎದುರಿಸ್ತೀರಿ. ನೀವು ಯಾರದೇ ಕಷ್ಟ ಕಾರ್ಪಣ್ಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಹಾಗೆ ಅವರು ಕಷ್ಟಪಡಬೇಕು, ಕಷ್ಟಪಡದೇ ಇದ್ರೂ ಒದ್ದಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ವಾದದ ಸರಣಿ ನೀವು ಪದೇ 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 ಕೇಳ್ತೀರಿ. ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ರಿಮೈಂಡ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ದಟ್ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ won the genetic lottery. You have to remind people that they have become what they are because of a very interesting point. There was this Protestant minister, John Bradford, in the 16th century, and he said, there, but for the grace of God or the accident of fortune, go I. But for the grace of God or the accident of fortune. Now, if I am the recipient of fortune, what do I owe fellow human beings? See, this is the critical question. I have done extremely well for myself, so what do I owe others? Now, two things have to be kept in mind. My success is not my own. Secondly, if others have helped me, if others have worked for me, because labor is not a commodity, I can never say I paid for it and I am quits. No, we are bound to each other by the silken threads of social solidarity. ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಇಲಾಖೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋರು, ಆಸ್ಪತ್ರೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋ ನ್ಯಾಯಾಧೀಶರು, ಕೇಳಿ ಜಡ್ಜ್ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಸಿಕ್ಕಾಪಟ್ಟೆ ಕಷ್ಟಪಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಒಪ್ತೀರಾ ಸರ್ ನೀವು? ನ್ಯಾಯಾಧೀಶರು ಶಾನೆ
ನ್ಯಾಯ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಕಷ್ಟ.
ಮಾತು ಪಡಬೇಕು, ಹುಚ್ಚಾಪಟ್ಟೆ ಓದಬೇಕು. ನಾವು ಅನ್ಕೋತೀವಿ ಜಡ್ಜ್ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರಿಗೆ ದುಡ್ಡು ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. ಅವ್ರು ಇಲ್ಲ ಬರೋಲ್ಲ, ಗೊತ್ತು ನನಗೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಪಡೋ ಕಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ
ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು
ಹೌದು ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಸ್ ಮಚ್ ನೋಡಿ, ಮೆನಿ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ದಿಸ್. ನ್ಯಾಯಮೂರ್ತಿಗಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನಾನು ಹೇಳಬೇಕು, ಭಾರತದ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು ಏನೇ ಇದ್ರೂ ಒಂದು ನಾವು ನೆನ್ಪಿಟ್ಕೋಬೇಕು, ನಮ್ಮ ಸುಪ್ರೀಂ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ದು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಇಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ರೈಟ್ಸ್ ಜೂರಿಸ್ಪ್ರುಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅನ್ಪ್ಯಾರಲಲ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ದಿಸ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಟು ಗ್ಲೋಬಲ್ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನಲಿಸಮ್ ಇಸ್ ಅನ್ಪ್ಯಾರಲಲ್ಡ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. 2014, Justice Gopal Gowda, sitting with Justice A.K. Patnaik, gave a remarkable ruling in the Akshardham case. ಅದನ್ನು ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಓದಬೇಕು. ನಾನು ಓದಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಸರ್, ತುಂಬ ಸೊಗಸಾಗಿದೆ. ಐ ವಾಂಟ್ ಯು ಟು ನೋ. Yes, absolutely. I want you to know that people not only in this country but even abroad are grateful to judges like you. You have done an extraordinary amount of work. So, ಈ ಥರ ಅನೇಕರು ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರತ್ಯಕ್ಷವಾಗಿ ಪರೋಕ್ಷವಾಗಿ ಸಹಾಯ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮದೇ ಆದ ಪ್ರತಿಭೆಯಿಂದ ನಾವು ಮುಂದೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ಮೂಢನಂಬಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೇಗ ಬಿಡ್ತೀವೋ ಅಷ್ಟು ಉತ್ತಮ. ಇದಲ್ಲದೆ ಈ ವಿಚಾರಧಾರೆಯನ್ನು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸಿ, ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬಹಳ ಇದೆ. ತತ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಜ್ಞರು ಬಹಳ ಜನ ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಲಕ್ ಇಗ್ಯಾಲಿಟೇರಿಯನಿಸಮ್ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಹೊಸ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಇದೆ. ಇಫ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಲಕ್ಕಿ ದೆನ್ ಐ ಓ ಇಟ್ ಟು ಅದರ್ಸ್ ಟು ಶೇರ್ ಮೈ ಗುಡ್ ಲಕ್ ವಿತ್ ದೆಮ್. ಈ ನಾನು ಭಾಳ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಸಂಗೀತಗಾರ, ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಹಾಡು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ನಾನು ಹೇಳಲ್ಲ, ಇರಲಿ, ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ 8 ಗಂಟೆ ಕಾಲ ದಿನಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಅಭ್ಯಾಸ ಮಾಡಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಆದರೆ ನಂಗೆ ಯಾರೋ ಒಬ್ಬರು ಮೇಸ್ಟ್ರು ಸಿಕ್ಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಯಾರೋ ಒಬ್ಬರು ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಟಿವ್ ಇಯರ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ದೀಸ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ ಫಾಲ್ ಇನ್ ಲೈನ್. ಇಫ್ ಯು ಆರ್ ಸಿಟ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಇನ್ ಸಮ್ ರಿಮೋಟ್ ವಿಲೇಜ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ನಾರ್ತ್ ಈಸ್ಟ್ ಆರ್ ಎಲ್ಸ್ವೇರ್, you are out of luck. Where you are born, to who you are born, and so on, these are not in your hands. The important point to keep in mind is this: we must not penalize people for their unelected circumstances. We must never, ever penalize people for their unelected circumstances. If you keep that in mind, you have empathy. This is why John Rawls, the philosopher who wrote this extraordinary book in the 70s called A Theory of Justice, says that any system of distributive justice you create must have 3 conditions. Number 1, you cannot ask for yourself a liberty that you are not willing to give to others. Point number 1. Point number 2, in any social arrangement that you create, the rights of the most vulnerable communities can never be compromised. Number 3, there must be equality of opportunity for everyone. And Rawls said, we have a problem doing this because we take a lot of things for granted. I am male. I come from a very educated family. I had the opportunity to go abroad, etc., etc. I take a lot of things for granted. I am able-bodied. So Rawls talks about going behind the veil of ignorance. So he says, mentally, go behind a veil of ignorance. You don't know if you're male, female, transgender. You don't know if you're gay or lesbian. You don't know if you're able-bodied. If you don't know if you're rich, poor, black, white, nothing. Having gone behind the veil of ignorance, now make your choices. You will come up with the right society. Very important point he made. Therefore, one has to keep these Rawlsian principles in mind. ಇದರಿಂದ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತ ದೇಶದ ಒಬ್ಬ ಬಹಳ ಗಣ್ಯ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ, ಭಾರತ ರತ್ನ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಅಮರ್ತ್ಯ ಸೇನ್ ಒಂದು ವಾದದ ಸರಣಿಯನ್ನು ನಮಗೆ ತಂದುಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. 1979ರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಟ್ಯಾನರ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ಸ್ ಆನ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್ ಅಂತ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾನ್ಫರ್ಡ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಷಣ ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದರು, ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ವಾಟ್. ನೋಡಿ, ಅಪ್ ಅಂಟಿಲ್ ದೆನ್ ನಾನು ಇದುವರೆಗೂ ಹೇಳಿದಂಥ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಅಸಮಾನತೆ ಇತ್ಯಾದಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಜನರ ಧೋರಣೆ ಏನಿತ್ತು, ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸಸ್ನ ನೀವು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಸಮನಾಗಿ ಹಂಚಿಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಸಾಕು. ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ಡಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂ. ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ದಕ್ಕಬೇಕಾದಂತಹ ಪಾಲು ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಬಗೆಹರಿಯುತ್ತೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸೇನ್ ಸೆಡ್ ನೋ, that's not true. It's not what you get, but what you do with what you get matters a lot. Two things. Number one, the diversity of individual choices. It's very important. Meaning, ನಿಮಗೆ 10,000 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ರಿಗೆ 10,000 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಬಳಸ್ತಾರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅವರ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ಅಭಿರುಚಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಅವಲಂಬಿಸಿದೆ. ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಕೇವಲ ಸೊತ್ತನ್ನು ಜನರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಮಾನವಾಗಿ ಹಂಚೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳನ್ನ ಬಗೆಹರಿಸ್ಕೋತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಸರ್ವಥಾ ತಪ್ಪು. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಅನೇಕರಿಗೆ ನೀವು ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಪೋಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆಯೇ ಹೊರತು ಸದುಪಯೋಗ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆ? ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದೇ ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಕೆಪಬಿಲಿಟೀಸ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೇರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಹಿ ಟಾಕ್ಡ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಕೆಪಬಿಲಿಟೀಸ್ ಅಪ್ರೋಚ್. ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ 90% ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಂದಿ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ? ಬಿಕಾಸ್ their human development indices are poor. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. ಇವೆಲ್ಲವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಗಮನಿಸಿದಾಗ ನಮಗೆ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಗೋಚರವಾಗೋದು ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂದರೆ, ಈಗಿನವರೆಗೂ ಇದ್ದಂಥ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ನು ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಒಪ್ಪಂದ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ವೋ ಇನ್ನು ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಅದು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಹೊಸ ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಒಪ್ಪಂದವೊಂದನ್ನು ರೂಪಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು. And what are going to be its characteristics? Number one, security for all. There's a wonderful book by Minouche Firak. She is the director of the London School of Economics, and her book is titled What We Owe Each Other, published by Princeton University Press. And she talks about this importance of creating a new social contract. She says we must have security for all, maximum investment in capability. This is from the Amartya Sen perspective. And number three, efficient and fair sharing of risks. ನೋಡಿ, ಡೆವಲಪ್ಮೆಂಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರೋ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇದು ಎನ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಲಿಟಿಗೇಷನ್. ಜಡ್ಜ್ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಎನ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಲಿಟಿಗೇಷನ್ ಮೊಟ್ಟ ಮೊದಲನೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂದರೆ, ನೀವು ಡ್ಯಾಮ್ ಕಟ್ತೀರಾ, ಒಂದಿಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಓಡಿಸ್ತೀರಾ. Why should they bear the negative externalities of your action? Exactly. Absolutely. Why should?
Litigation is still on.
Indeed, you're right. You're absolutely, because this issue is unresolved. And I may, with utmost respect to the judiciary, say, if you promise not to misunderstand me,
Definitely not.
that the judiciary is not always, shall we say, competent to resolve these issues. It lacks what we call epistemic competence. Epistemic competence antandre lived knowledge of the lives of people.
100% I agree with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I knew I'm a smart man, and Justice Gopal Gowda has affirmed it.
This is what I have been telling, not in public, other places.
I know that. I know exactly what you're saying. I wish there are more people like you. I really hope and do, particularly now, but I will not go into that. So, second, social contract is very important. Now, ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಸರಿ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ನೀವು ಹೇಳೋದೆಲ್ಲ ಭಾಳ ರೋಚಕವಾಗಿದೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ನಾನು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು? ನೋಡಿ, ಆ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆನ ನೀವು ಉತ್ತರಿಸೋಕ್ಕೆ ಮೊದಲೇ ನೀವು ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನೇ ಕೇಳ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾದ ವಿಚಾರ, ನಾನು ಯಾರು? ಯಾಕೆ ಕೇಳಬೇಕು ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ? ಆಮ್ ಐ an agitator? Some are agitators. Am I an agitator? Okay. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಟೌನ್ ಹಾಲ್ ಮುಂದೆ ಪ್ಲೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಹಿಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಅಗತ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. There are better ways of serving. Am I an innovator? There are many who are ideas people and they make contributions too. Am I an orchestrator? A wonderful orchestrator in our midst is our own beloved comrade Muralidhar. He's a phenomenal orchestrator. Look at what he has done today. So there are agitators, innovators, and orchestrators. You have to ask yourself who I am. It depends on your strengths, it depends on your interests, and the bandwidth you have, your personal life circumstances. That's the first thing. Having identified that, I have come up with 10 strategies for dealing with this problem of reclaiming rights. And the very first strategy I suggest is get the facts. Get the facts. Read as widely as you can about labor issues. Why? As Maya Angelou, the African American poet, rightly said, we do better when we know better. We do better when we know better. You must get the facts. ಇನ್ನೊಂದಿದೆ ವಿಚಾರ ನೋಡಿ, ಮಹಾನ್ ದಾರ್ಶನಿಕರು, ತತ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಜ್ಞರು, ಮಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ನಮ್ಮ ಮೇಷ್ಟ್ರು ಕೂತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. ನಾನು ಉಬಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಯಸ್ಕೊತೀನಿ. ಐ ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಡ್ರಾ ಯರ್ ಅಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಟು ಬುದ್ಧಿಸಮ್. ಬುದ್ಧ 4 noble truths ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ. And the 4th noble truth is Dukkha Nirodha Gamini Patipada, the path leading to the cessation of suffering, and that is the 8-fold path. 8-fold path ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊಟ್ಟ ಮೊದಲನೇದು ಯಾವುದು? ಸಮ್ಮದಿಟ್ಟಿ, right view. Right view. Why? Because if you don't have the right view, you become a victim of illusions. Dash, 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 paksha, adhikarak bandre nam samasya sari hogatte. Dash, dash, ಮಂದಿ ಅಧಿಕಾರ ವಹಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಉದ್ಧಾರ ಆಗಿ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀವಿ. ನೋಡಿ, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಸೂಚ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಬೇಡಿ. ಮನೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗೋವಳು ಹಾಲು ಹೆಪ್ಪಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾಳೆ. ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ನಡುನೀರಲ್ಲಿ ಕೈ ಬಿಟ್ಟವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಅಭ್ಯುದಯಕ್ಕೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾವುದೇ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳು ತರಬಹುದು, ಯಾವುದೇ ಹೊಸ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯನ್ನು ರೂಪಿಸಬಹುದು. ನಾವು ಈ ಥರದ ಜೊಳ್ಳು ಭರವಸೆಗಳನ್ನ ನಂಬದೇ ಇರೋದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ವಿ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಇಮ್ಯಾನ್ಸಿಪೇಟ್ ಅವರ್ ಸೆಲ್ಸ್ ಫ್ರಾಮ್ ದ ವಾಯ್ಸ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಗ್ರಿಪ್ ಆಫ್ ದೀಸ್ ಇಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ಸ್. And that critically rests on getting to know the facts. This is supremely important. I want you to understand, what you don't know, you will not care for. What you don't care for, you will not like. What you don't like, you will not love. What you don't love will not flourish. What does not flourish can only perish. Everything begins with knowledge. So get the facts, number 1. Number 2, empathize and reach out. ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಂಘಟನೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿರುವಂತಹ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಗುಣ ಅಂದರೆ ಎಂಪತಿ, ಕರುಣ. ಯಾಕಂತಂದರೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಹಿತಾಸಕ್ತಿಗಳ ವಿರುದ್ಧವೇ ಮಾತಾಡುವಂತಹ ಸಾವಿರಾರು ಜನಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕಾಣ್ತೀವಿ. I teach in the city of Flint in Michigan, which was the site of the great Flint sit-in strike, the GM strike, 1935. Now, that site is just down the road from my building. Flint was an industrial town, and many of my students are rabid opponents of unions. They are working class children. They don't want unions. The fact is, 1980s jobs went away from Flint to Mexico, and then from Mexico to China. Flint is a deindustrialized city. I tell them about this, they don't know. You need empathy. ನೋಡಿ, ನಿಮ್ಗೊಂದು ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಕತೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಅಮೇರಿಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬರು ಮಹಾನುಭಾವರು ಇದ್ದರು, ಯೂಜಿನ್ ಡೆಬ್ಸ್. He was the candidate of the Socialist Party of America 5 times for President of the United States. 5 times. Eugene Debs 104 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ಹಿಂದೆ 1918 he opposed America's involvement in World War I and he opposed the draft. So he gives a speech against the administration of Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at that time, and he said that the war is something that the US should not be involved in. He opposed the draft, and of course, being a socialist, he staunchly advocated socialism. He was arrested on 30th June 2018 and charged with 10 counts of sedition. I will not say more. Debs was sentenced on 18th September 1918 to 10 years in prison, and he was disenfranchised for life. Now, Eugene Debs conducted his own trial. He conducted his own trial. He was not interested in a lawyer. At his sentencing conviction, he spoke for 2 hours. And at that sentencing conviction, he made a very interesting point. He said, "Your Honor, years ago, I recognized my kinship with all living beings, and I made up my mind that I was not one bit better than the meanest on earth. I say then, and I say now, if there is a lower class, I am in it. So long as there is a lower class, I am in it. So long as there is a criminal element, I am of it. So long as there is a soul in prison, I am not free." This was Eugene Debs. He was soon after led to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. From the prison, he ran for president in 2020 for the 5th and last time and garnered close to 1 million votes. He was an extraordinary man. That kind of isomorphism, total identity with members of the working class is what we need. That's why I say we have to empathize and reach out. Resist the status quo is the next one. Subvert received wisdom. A lot of people have unexamined views. ಐತಿಹ್ಯಗಳು ಜನ ಬೇಕಾದಷ್ಟು ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಜನರಿಗೆ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು. Elevate the debate. Elevate the debate. This is supremely important. Any intervention you make will not go in vain. ನೋಡಿ, 10th of January 1776 ಅಮೇರಿಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬ ಮಹಾನ್ ಭಾವ ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಪ್ಯಾಂಫ್ಲೆಟ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದರು, called Common Sense. Common Sense. It was written by Thomas Paine. 1776. 500,000 copies were sold. 5 ಲಕ್ಷ ಕಾಪಿ 1776 ನಲ್ಲಿ. You can never stop an idea whose time has come, and therefore elevate the debate is supremely important. Synergize with allies. American labor movement ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಲೋಗನ್ ಇದೆ, don't mourn, organize. Don't mourn, organize. There was this extraordinary African American leader called W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the first African American to get a doctorate at Harvard. W.E.B. Du Bois was also the founder of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of People of Color. And Du Bois said that for the African American community to succeed, the top 10%, the talented 10th, must take the lead. Must take the lead. This was in 1903 when he wrote a book called The Negro Problem. Much later, 1948, he revised his opinion and talked about the guiding 100. He said, no, reach out to other groups, minorities and so on, join hands with them, and you must have 100 people in each community who will be selfless and will help others come up. So that is precisely what we want to do. We need social media for our efforts. You know the Me Too movement, 140 characters brought down some very, very powerful people. They were dethroned. Harvey Weinstein is one of them. Bill Cosby is one of them. Several others. And that is precisely what we should do. Synergize with allies. Follow the money. Follow the money. Very important. Anytime someone talks, find out where this guy got the money from. Extremely important. Nodi, Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, Pandora Papers, these were all about offshore investments. Together, these three sets of documents that were leaked, thanks to the work of the International Consortium of Journalists, they resulted in 25.3 million leaked documents, 214,488 offshore entities, and 6.9 terabytes of data. 1 terabyte is a trillion byte. 1 terabyte is a trillion byte. So think about how much data there is. I'll give you one hint. Prashne kelbedi. ಈ Paradise, Pandora and Panama Papers ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಗುರುತಿಸ್ಬೋದಂತ ಜನಗಳು ಇದ್ದಾರಾ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿ, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾರನ್ನ ಸಿಕ್ಕರೆ ನನಗೆ ಹೇಳಿ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು. Just see if there is someone you can recognize. You will be surprised. Tax havens. 65 jurisdictions in the world, they are tax havens. You can park your monies, no questions asked. Together they hold anywhere between 7 to 10 trillion dollars. The tax owed on this amount is anywhere between 150 to 250 billion dollars. And because people stash away monies in these tax havens, they do not pay anything in their home countries, and this is legally allowed under what are called tax avoidance programs. Go after tax havens, go after people who have monies. Next, expose the race to the bottom. The World Inequality Report talks about how in instance after instance people are being pushed to the bottom, and we have to be mindful. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಾರಣ ಇದೆ. Labor is extremely fixed, whereas capital is mobile. ಈ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಡದೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ we must expose the race to the bottom and forge alliances with people. Shame the exploiters. ನಮ್ಮ ಪರಿಸರದಲ್ಲೇ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ವರ್ಗದವ್ರನ್ನ ಶೋಷಣೆಗೆ ಗುರಿಪಡಿಸುವಂಥವ್ರು, ಕಿರುಕುಳ ಕೊಡೋರು, ಹಿಂಸೆ ಮಾಡೋರನ್ನ ಮುಲಾಜಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಬಹಿರಂಗಪಡಿಸಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಚಿಮಾರಿ ಹಾಕಬೇಕು. You have to do this. It's called shaming the exploiters. Supremely important. Exercise your purchasing power. If there is one thing that big corporations will sit up and pay attention to, it is when you talk through your wallet. Worldwide, total retail sales was $23.7 trillion in 2020. 23.7. ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ 2020 ಇಸ್ವಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಸೇರಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಖರ್ಚು ಮಾಡಿದ್ವು? $883 billion. $883 billion was what we collectively spent. That's power. If you boycott businesses that don't treat people with dignity, well, that's a powerful statement. Lastly, lobby to disinvest and revoke the corporate charter. If there's a corporation that is not living up to its social responsibilities, well, by law, it can be dissolved. We have to just lobby. So these are the 10 principles that I have in mind. Friends, before I conclude, I wish to make 2 quick points. 1999, the ILO came with the Decent Work Initiative. And the Decent Work Initiative was all about making work decent by ensuring that the terms and conditions of work were such that work was meaningful. Well, several labor scholars have criticized the ILO's concept of decent work as too constricted. I join them. And I believe that work must have 4 non-negotiable elements. And they are, number 1, human dignity. ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಡಿಗ್ನಿಟಿ, ಮಾನವ ಘನತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಕೇಪಬಿಲಿಟಿ, ಮಾನವ ಸಾಮರ್ಥ್ಯ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಸೆಕ್ಯೂರಿಟಿ, ಮಾನವ ರಕ್ಷೆ ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ, ಸುರಕ್ಷೆ ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಫ್ಲರಿಶಿಂಗ್, ಮಾನವ ಸಮೃದ್ಧಿ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಅಬವ್ ಆಲ್, I wish to argue that the notion of decent work has to be segued into the Aristotelian notion of eudaimonia. What is eudaimonia? Roughly translated as happiness. It's a Greek term that resists translation. It has several shades of meaning. Among other things, it means being able to realize one's higher self. So we must have a social arrangement that enables us to realize our potential, our higher self. Work in its myriad forms must equip us to transcend our petty considerations and realize our higher selves. This brings me to the second and the last point. Both Plato and Socrates emphasize that virtue is the cornerstone of eudaimonia. One of the most critical virtue is that we must embrace is the conviction that the working class movement is not just about money, perks and privileges. That's the quickest way to discredit us. ನೋಡಿ, ನೀವು ಸಂಬಳ, ಸಾರಿಗೆ, ಭತ್ಯೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಅನೇಕರು ಕಡೆಗಣಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಇಫ್ ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ an agenda, salary, perks and privileges must be number 8 or number 9. What we as members of the working class are interested in is creating a just and equitable world that enables everyone to realize the human potential. Why is this important? Because we don't own our lives. We have borrowed it from the coming generations. We owe it to them to leave behind a world that is much better than what we got. Activists and ideologues alike must dedicate themselves to this edifying task. Anything less would be a grave injustice to the coming generations. Thank you for your patient hearing. Jai Karnataka, Jai Hind.